Good evening. This tape goes far and wide from here, and you'd be surprised at the reaction that we get in the joy that people have when they hear that good evening come on and the response. And very often when they know that it's coming from Hawaii, it brings many things to them, not only because they hear me so often speak of Hawaii, but almost all of our students, if not all of them by now, know Don Blanding too. I suppose most of them knew him long before they knew me, but those that didn't know him then certainly know him now. And so they hear of it and read of it. And so Hawaii has become to many of our students even more than it has to the rest of the United States. And it's surprising how much it's in their thought over there, much more than ever before in my days. And so that brings a thrill. But I notice also that when we have a class in Seattle and the students in Chicago or New York hear it, it also brings something to their mind. And now, let's see, just about the last 4 years, there has been quite a great many students who go from one city to another when there are going to be classes. And so there will be students in New York who have been at a Seattle class or Los Angeles class. And so as they hear these voices back and forth, it brings back memories to them. So we try to give them our aloha in one way or another in all our recordings. But I started to talk about the shocks that a world can take. You undoubtedly know from the newspapers that the hydrogen bomb explosion was something in the nature of a superlative, greatest, largest, heaviest, so forth and so on, and most frightening. And you undoubtedly have read that the two men who have contributed the most to the development of the atomic bomb have had to be, at least temporarily, removed from their work under suspicion of one sort or another. That's almost like accusing Caesar's wife, to accuse the men who have been that close to the program. And you've undoubtedly read of the publication of a new book accusing Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Marshall of having been responsible for Pearl Harbor. So this week has been quite alive in shocks to the world. But none of that seemed to move me at all. But I was moved last night, just by one of those coincidences. I was looking at a television. I hope none of our friends will hold that against me. I've said so much against television so often. And now to hear that I actually watched it will shock some of them. But I do it again under the same circumstances. I listened to Bishop Sheehan last night. And it was more shocking to me than all the rest of the news that I've talked about. Only this shock was, to me, pleasant. But I wonder what it was to the 10 million people who were listening and heard him say that the prayer of petition isn't a good prayer at all. At best, it's a secondary prayer, but actually, it doesn't accomplish anything. And then he went on to tell them more about the nature of prayer as we have been hearing it here the last month. And he didn't go quite as far as we did because it probably was his first experience in telling 10 million people that what they had been taught of prayer for the last 1,000 years wasn't so very good and wasn't effective and shouldn't be depended upon. And he told them at the end in very, very plain language that it is not right to go to God for anything. It is not right to ask God for anything. That when you go to God, you must go for something spiritual. Now, if that wasn't a bombshell into the theological world, not that the Roman Catholic Church hasn't always known the true secret of prayer, not that there haven't been people in all the churches, in every denomination in the world, who haven't, because there's nothing secret about it. Every great mystic, and some not so great, has revealed the true nature of prayer, but never has it been given openly to the world, certainly not to 10 million people at one time, to be told that the prayer of petition isn't a very good prayer, and that you mustn't ever go to God for anything, but rather for something, for some spiritual good. Now, this is more or less in line also with what I've been saying this past month, that we are entering a new era. The infinite way is but one of the approaches, one of the ways in which this new era is being introduced. The secret of the new era will lie in this, that for the first time in the history of the world, people will be, the masses of people, will be made aware of the nature of God, something that has never before been revealed to masses. It has been revealed in monasteries, in convents, in ashramas, in places where deep students of mysticism have gathered or been taught, but never has it come out into the open. As a matter of fact, the only literature on the subject is probably in a few books like Letters of a Scattered Brotherhood, or that's Mary Strong's book, or Man and God by Victor Gollancz, some hints at it in Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, and scattered quotations in other writings. But so far as I know, there is no book before The Infinite Way, 1947, that is devoted exclusively and completely to the subject of the nature of God and the nature of prayer in or from this purely spiritual basis. But all along I have said that this is only the beginning of a new era, and that we will see the signs of it coming from many directions. Now, for several years, Henry Thomas Hamlin, in his Science of Thought Review, published in Chichester, England, has been writing on prayer and higher forms of treatment from this same approach. But this, I am sure, is true, that from now on you are going to find more and more literature entering the world, and through the churches too, just on the line of Bishop Sheehan's talk last night, revealing the nature of prayer and the nature of God. You know, for a man in his position, he said a very strange thing last night. He said that God doesn't require anyone's praise, that so far as God is concerned, there's no need to praise God. In other words, he indicated also, if not in the words, in the sense, that no one has to be grateful so far as God is concerned. God needs nobody's gratitude. God needs nobody's praise. And then he went on to show the place that gratitude and praise have. We need gratitude. We need praise. It is necessary that we praise God. It is necessary that we be grateful to God. It is necessary that we humble ourselves in the presence of God, because these are our contacts with God. Not that God has any need of them. Now, that same thing I have called attention to on the subject of supply. There is no spiritual teacher, that is, no teacher who has been touched by the divine consciousness, who requires anybody's gratitude or anybody's praise or anybody's supply. But we, as we come in contact with them, we need the recognition of them, the gratitude, the reward, the compensation, not for their sake, because it must be clear that Moses could support himself beautifully without any help from his people. He not only could support himself, but he could feed the whole Hebrew nation who was with him. And it is still clear that the Master, Christ Jesus, needed nobody's praise, needed nobody's support or supply. He not only could well take care of himself, but he could take care of the multitudes who came to him. And so it has been that everyone who has been touched by the Spirit has been given a divine grace that enabled them to take care of their own needs without anyone's help. But that did not signify that those who benefited by these masters or teachers or leaders were not under the necessity of recognizing that and pouring themselves out in that way to the same degree that the masters or teachers have poured themselves out in another. And so it was a tremendous surprise to hear him say that God needs no one's praise, but that everyone on earth needs the quality that makes them praise God, that makes them grateful, that makes them humble in the presence of that which is really the divine. So, while I know that 10 million people must have been shocked, I don't think any of them were quite as shocked as I was, and in my case it was a joyous shock, because there never will be happiness on earth. There never will be peace on earth. There never will be prosperity on earth until we come to the recognition that God is not a giving God and God is not a withholding God, that God is just God, and God is being God at all times, and God's grace is forever flowing to all those who are open and receptive to it. And he brought out that point of receptivity, too. It's surprising the building didn't fall down when he said this. He said, you know, in this building there are many noises going on, bands playing, news on the air, and even a Milton Berle comedy program. And he said, you are not hearing any of that. None of you are hearing any of that. What are you hearing? Well, they were hearing this program devoted to holiness, to God, to spiritual things. And he says, why are you not hearing those other things? Because you're not tuned in. And how he did it, I can't remember, but he indicated very clearly that all these people who were listening to noises could just as well have been tuned in to God and holiness. But they were holding themselves out. God wasn't holding himself out from them. The word of truth wasn't being held out from anybody, but these people were themselves holding themselves out from it by tuning into the noises. Well, isn't it true? Here we are tuned in to that which means the most to us. And therefore, what we are tuned into will open itself and flow out to us. We too could just as well be opened to noises of one nature or another. But we aren't. We are tuned in to that which at this moment means most to us. The only thing we have to determine is what degree of response we will receive, and to what we look, to what degree we are willing to attune ourselves to that to which we are attuned at this moment. Because, you see, there is a world of good to be gotten from being tuned in once a week or twice a week for a few minutes to God. There is much more to be gained by a daily attunement to God, and still more by an hourly attunement to God. The whole question is with us, not only to what we attune ourselves, but to what degree that attunement occupies our experience. Pray without ceasing means exactly what it says. Pray without ceasing. That every moment can be a prayer. But now that we know that prayer doesn't mean asking God for things, we can find ways to pray without ceasing, to pray every day, every hour, almost every minute. Because now we are not praying in the sense of petitioning, nor are we praying in the sense of asking, nor are we going to God for material things or conditions, but for spiritual good, for spiritual awareness. Well, no matter what we are doing, no matter what work we are about, it is a simple matter, occasionally, to close our eyes, and it only has to be a blink of the eye, as a recognition of God as the source of our good, a recognition of God as the only law unto our good, the only substance, the only cause, the only reality. It only takes a second to have a realization of that type. It only takes a second when getting into an automobile to realize that God is the law of the road, that God is the mind and soul of the drivers, every driver, because God is universal good. God is never absent from any place or anyone. Therefore, God is the intelligence of every driver. And so, as we find occasion to attune ourselves to our spiritual source, we will find that very experience, that what comes back to us is from that to which we have attuned ourselves. And if we have tuned in on a lot of noisy programs, or on a lot of noisy days, or a lot of fearful days, or doubtful days, or thoughts, naturally that is the melody that is played back to us. Whereas if we attune ourselves to the spirit, to the soul, that likewise is the melody that plays itself back into our experience. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Well, if we sow to the Spirit, we reap life everlasting. But each one must ask himself this question: how do I attune myself to the Spirit? How do I go about this idea of reaping, of sowing to the Spirit, so that I reap life everlasting, life harmonious, life bountiful, life beautiful? Because it is something more than words. Be assured of this. The least part of prayer is words. The least part of tuning into God is words. We need no words necessarily to tune into God with. It is all right to use words at a certain state of our, and it is all right to use thoughts at a certain state of our development, but the major part of prayer and the major part of attuning to the Spirit, of sowing to the Spirit, has nothing to do with words. It has to do with an attitude. It isn't so much words as it is an attitude. I don't have to say in words or think in words that God is the source of my good. It's an attitude to me because I never look to any other source. I never think of any other source as being a part of my good or my supply. I know that there are wonderful people who are the avenues through which it comes. That I know. But that's not the source. They are only the instruments God is using. And so it is an attitude with me, or an atmosphere with me, of a continuous realization of God as the source. Not in so many words, a feeling. I guess attitude best expresses it. Well, so it is, let us say, with health. We all know the health laws and the material laws, but after a while, we may at first need words and thoughts to remind ourselves that God is a law of spirit and the only law unto our health. We may have to use words and thoughts to remind ourselves that since God gave us life, God can maintain life. But after a while, no words and no thoughts are involved. It becomes an attitude, an atmosphere of being in which, without consciously thinking, your entire dependence is on this inner law instead of an outer effect. Well, it's in the same way that at first I can see where it would be necessary to use statements or thoughts to remind ourselves that we must never hate, fear, or love effects. We must get used to the idea that we mustn't hate bad weather or fear bad weather. We mustn't hate germs or fear germs. We mustn't hate wrong foods or wrong climates or fear them. We mustn't hate this and we mustn't fear this. Oh, I can see where at first it might be necessary to remind ourselves in words and thoughts of these truths, just as we read them over and over and over again or hear them in the recordings as reminders. But remember that the time must come when that must become an atmosphere or attitude of being in which normally you realize, thou couldst have no power out here over me. All power is of the Father within. Thou couldst have no power over me except it came from the Father. And the Father is this presence within. And gradually then you so lose your fear and hate of the many things that the world is fearing and hating that it becomes automatic to know that your good is coming to you from within you, not from without. In the same way that ordinarily we humanly are so used to the idea that husbands owe wives something, and wives owe husbands something, and children owe parents, and parents owe children. We've accepted those world standards for so many years that we have forgotten that there isn't a word of truth in it. Actually, nobody owes anybody anything but to love one another. You see, once we catch the idea that our good unfolds to us from within our own being, nobody is under any obligation to us anymore. And we are under obligation to nobody except to love them and express that love in whatever way our relationship is. But it is not an obligation as the world sees it. It isn't. Everything we do for each other, we ultimately must come to do not because of any obligation. And not because of any legal tie, but because it's our love to do it. Just as at Easter time, we may bring the children Easter eggs, or we may bring husband or wife a flower, or friends flowers, or send a tie to a man to whom we feel that relationship. But wouldn't it be a terrible thing if we did it out of a sense of obligation or duty? That is the thing that has hurt so much of the Christmas spirit, that too much of it is done because of an obligation. I must give my brother something, or my sister, or my parents. I must, and that takes all of the joy of the giving out of it. Now, there does eventually come a day, and it can only come once you have seen that you do not require a living soul on earth for your good. You do not require the presence of a parent, a child, a husband, or a wife, or any other living soul for your good. You are utterly and completely dependent on the Father within you. Now, at first, that may only be a statement of truth. And later, it may become a quotation that you use in your experience to remind yourself, wait a minute, it would appear that my wife owes me this or my husband owes me that, but actually, let us be honest. If I had no wife or I had no husband, what then? Oh, then I would have to turn to God. Well, no, maybe I would turn to a parent or another relative. Yes, but if I ran out of those, eventually I would get to that place where there was no one left but God. Well, that'd be a nice place to start from instead of end up with. And each of us does end up with it in one way or another. But how much better it would be if we started with it and said, no, I will accept from husband or wife or parent or child, I will accept from patient or student, but I will not expect, I will not see it as an obligation. I will not see it as if they owed it to me. As a matter of fact, they owe me nothing but love, and only love on whatever their concept of love is, because they can't be any bigger than their concept is at any given moment. But my dependence is on the Father within, and there must open out a way of demonstration. Well, many people, when they are forced to depend on themselves, find eventually that they can. But there would be no need for that if we could start our existence with the understanding of the nature of God. God is not merely father, mother, sister, brother, husband or wife. God is much more than these. God is our own being. God is our own essence and support. God is the very fiber of our being. Nothing can be added to God. Nothing can be added to the fiber of our being. Therefore, we need nothing more than that which we already are, which is infinity itself. The Son of God, heir of God, joint heir with Christ and God, to all the heavenly riches. That is already our relationship to a God that never gives, that just is eternally pouring itself forth as our being. Why, you couldn't any more start the flow of God than you could start daytime or nighttime. You can't start time. You can't start 2 times 2 being 4. There never has been a time when 2 times 2 were anything but 4. There never has been a time when the law of like begetting like wasn't in operation. There couldn't be a start to rose seeds giving off roses. Well, what would they have given off yesterday? No. These things are eternal, infinite, immortal. The only way we can ever understand immortality is if we take an idea like that. Was there ever a time when the seed of a rose didn't give off a rose? And then you will see that there could be no such thing as a beginning. Was there ever a time when 2 times 2 did not exist as 4. And then you'll see there's no such thing as a beginning. And no more can you start God beginning to bless you or heal you or prosper you. Oh, no, 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 no. You can tune in to the blessings that are flowing like we can tune in to these lights or tune into the sound. But you can't begin it. It's always been in operation. It's always been, and what we are doing is tuning in. So praising God, as he clearly brought out, is not going to benefit you from the standpoint of making God do something. God won't love you more for praising him. God won't love you less for damning him. That's for sure. But each of us comes into the benefit of that love by our attunement. And so the great question for each one of us is, how can we best tune in on that beam of God? What is it we can do that will bring us, not bring more of God to us, that's impossible. What will bring us more into the line and light of God? Because the secret is that we ourselves tune in or we ourselves tune out. That was a graphic thing he brought out last night. A graphic thing, a powerful thing. That here were these millions of people tuning in on noise, when at that same instant they could have been tuning in on that wonderful program of prayer, of holiness, that atmosphere of God. Don't you see that point? Well, that's the same thing with us. There is some way, it isn't as easy to tune in on God, I admit, as it is to tune in on his program or to come to this meeting. But there are ways of doing it, and they're individual ways. The way that works for me may not work for you. The way that you find effective may not be at all effective for me. And so again, the responsibility is on everyone's shoulder to find their own salvation. The best that any religious teaching can do, or the best that any religious teacher can do, is point the way that that person, that individual, found helpful to them, or the truths or parables or experiences that help them. But that does not save every individual in the world from finding their own ways of tuning in, of making themselves receptive and responsive to that way. I have brought this out when in our classes people have asked the question about tithing, and they want to know if it's beneficial. I guess it's beneficial to the one who receives the tithe, as a rule. But tithing can be beneficial. Tithing is a very spiritual activity, but not when you do it from any sense of obligation, not when you do it from any sense of hoping for a reward. Tithing is only beneficial when it is a free will act of praise or thanksgiving. When a person takes the dime or dollar from their pocket without any sense of return, as a matter of fact, when they can bring themselves to doing it anonymously, that is the point when the tithe really becomes a tremendous blessing, when it's a secret between the individual and God. Just as with us. You see through these meetings that we have no oral prayers. We have no spoken prayers. And it is for that same reason that, and I can only give of my experience, to me, prayer is something sacred and something secret. It's something that takes place between my Father and myself. And how can I go around talking about it or doing it any more than I would walk around saying to my wife or my friends, I love you, I love you, I love you? No, that's nobody's business but mine and the individuals who are concerned. It's a sacred thing, it's a secret thing, and if anybody else knows it, they only know it by the outward symbol or effect that they behold. And so it should be. if anyone does know that we love God and trust God supremely, they should know it not because we tell it to them, but because the evidence in our lives makes it evident. And evident to the degree that they say, you have something, what is it? Then we can impart it, we can share it. So, it is that in this new era, everyone on earth will know the secrets that Jesus knew, that John knew, that Paul knew. The secrets that separated them from the rest of mankind. The secret that Walt Whitman knew, that Ralph Waldo Emerson knew, that Dr. Buck knew. The secret that everyone who has had a taste of the mystical revelation within, Jacob Boehme of Germany, William Law of England, all of these people have known the same secret. If they hadn't known it, Bishop Sheen wouldn't have known it, because his beginning was reading it, and then later he experienced it. And so, as we in one way or another become aware that these things exist, then ultimately the experience comes to us. And so everyone in this room, every student of the infinite way, can ultimately have a God experience, because the entire literature is aimed at that point. The literature is not aimed at setting up a teaching to be followed. The literature is not aimed at setting up a church or a leader or anything of the kind. The literature, every bit of it, every one of the writings, every one of the recordings, is aimed at making a God experience possible to every individual on the face of the earth who can attune themselves to it. And the way is shown clearly, the way that it has happened in my experience and the way that it has happened in the experience of so many of our students who have worked with me. That's all in these writings. And then the student can go on from there and either follow in that example or come out into an original experience or through an original way. But the atmosphere must be developed. Spiritual living must be an attitude rather than statements or even thoughts. It must be a mode of life. I was just thinking this minute of swimming. Just think of swimming. It would be an impossibility to swim very far and be conscious of what you are doing. Nobody can swim very far while being conscious of moving their hands or feet. It has to be an activity of the body that goes on without any conscious thought whatever. Otherwise, it really isn't swimming. It's floundering around. And so it is, this whole life in the spirit becomes one where there is no thought about the spirit, where the whole spirit becomes an inner attitude and an outer expression. Now, one of the things the Master complained about was the practice of sacrifice. Those of you who have read much in the Old Testament know that system of sacrifice, the sacrificing of doves, the sacrificing of animals, the sacrificing of pure white lambs. The younger, the gentler, the greater the sacrifice, and so forth and so on. But even in that Old Testament, how many times are they reminded that God has no pleasure in your sacrifices? They've been told that several times in their own writings by their own prophets. God has no pleasure in your sacrifices. And certainly, the Master's mission began with that very thing of taking the people away from the belief that sacrifices had in them something of a spiritual nature. But sacrifice is the central theme of the Master's life. Not sacrificing animals or dollars, sacrificing oneself, one's personal ego, sacrificing, crucifying one's personal sense of powers, attaining the true humility. I can of my own self do nothing. The Father within me, he doeth the works. There is the sacrifice, and that is the sacrifice of the New Testament. The sacrifice of the Old Testament, which they themselves denounced, was the sacrifice of something external to ourselves. How nice it is to be able to sacrifice somebody else. Something that means nothing to us but giving up 10%. How easy a way to buy our way into heaven. But even in the Old Testament, they were told it isn't true, and the Master told them it isn't true. Never has been true, never will be true. The only sacrifice, you must lay down your life. If you do not lose your life, you cannot gain life eternal. Nothing greater than the one who lays down his life for another. There is the sacrifice, the giving up of a personal sense of selfhood. And so it is that if we think at all of a sacrifice to bring ourselves closer to God, let it be in the sense of what of myself can I sacrifice, not what of my possessions, which after all mean nothing. It's a strange thing that the world doesn't seem able to remember. That as you leave this plane, you have to check all your belongings at the gate. You can't take any of them with you. As you go out, you check them. There's a probate court waiting for everything you have. Well, how can giving up some part of it be a virtue when actually no part of it belongs to you and no part of it can remain with you? No, let us see that there is a spiritual sense to sacrifice. But it isn't the sacrificing of things, it isn't the sacrificing of persons, it is a sacrifice of some degree of selfhood to which we are clinging. That doesn't impair our personality or our individuality, nor does it deprive us of anything of a good nature that is in our makeup. It merely removes from us the egotistic sense of it, the personal possession sense, as if sunshine belonged to us, as if the perfume of flowers belonged to us, or any other good grace that really is God-given. So in seeking ways to tune in, it is right to ponder this idea of sacrifice and see in what way our sacrifice, or what it is that we must sacrifice on the altar before we can go further along the path of the Spirit. And so it is when it comes to the subject of praise and gratitude. Praise, which may be another name for recognition, just as we recognize God as the source of all good, the author of our works, so do we praise and give gratitude to every individual who has been a part of our spiritual experience, who has ever led us step by step toward whatever degree of realization we may be attaining or may at some future time attain. These people who have gone before us, Mrs. Eddy, Mrs. Fillmore, Mr. Fillmore, Emily Cady, any of these people who have really, by the devotion of their lives to the subject of God and truth, they have been responsible for some measure of our demonstration. It is true they haven't made our demonstration. They can't. They can't make our demonstration any more than I can make your demonstration. But never underestimate the part they have played in leading us to this. And let us give them freely, openly, joyously gratitude, praise, recognition, reward, compensation, whatever it is that lies within our power to do. For their sake, no, you see, they've all made their demonstration beautifully. They are making their demonstration now beautifully. They don't need us. And there isn't any living teacher who needs us. But we need them, and we need the recognition of them, and we need the praise and the gratitude, as he brought out, that we all need toward God. Those things also are important because they are prayer. Believe it or not, the recognition and the praise and the gratitude for every avenue or channel that has ever been a part of our spiritual experience is prayer. Just the recognition of it, the acknowledgement of it, gratitude for it. Every bit of that is a prayer. It's an acknowledgement of God. Now, and this is a subject that comes up so much in our work. Well, it comes in three parts: supply, health, and marriage. Of course, one of the great problems, well, the three great problems on earth today are supply, health, and marriage. But to hear the subject of marriage discussed, and the pros and cons of it, and the why it's a failure, why there are 75% divorces, you would think that there's a hidden secret that the world doesn't know as to why that is. You think there was some mysterious reason that hasn't yet been discovered, and we hope we'll find a way to overcome it. And that's a lot of nonsense. The reason for it is known, always has been known, and always will be known. And undoubtedly, just as this new era is coming in, a way will be found to evolve and bring forth marriage in a more successful way. But the whole answer to marriage is that it all takes place, or most of it, on a human plane. When people marry, there are 1,000 reasons why they should marry. There may be 2,000 why they shouldn't. Those aren't so well thought of. It's better to put those back here. I remember a man who went to my Christian Science teacher one time and said he wanted to marry a certain girl. And the teacher listened very carefully, and finally the young man said, "I know I could live very happily with her." My teacher said, "I advise you not to marry her. In fact, don't marry any girl that you feel you can live happily with. Don't marry any girl until you find the one you can't live without." But you see, there may be 1,000 reasons for marrying, but how many people defer marriage until they have a go signal from God, from the inside, that it is a marriage that has been made in heaven, that it's a spiritual thing? Oh, well, you know the answer as well as I do. It's probably none of us. There may be some wonderful souls here and there that have actually put aside every good consideration why they should marry and said, I'm not interested in those. I'm only interested in whether God has said it is right, and then waiting until the signal comes from within. Now, the reason I bring that up is this. Once you can see that no amount of human reasons for marriage can make a marriage happy or lasting or permanent or successful, that actually a marriage is a spiritual relationship. It's based on the spiritual relationship of God and man, oneness. Christ and man, oneness. The divine union which always results in two becoming one. Now, the only two that ever become one is individual consciousness and divine consciousness unite in meditation or communion and become one, and that one, God. That is the meaning of the spiritual marriage or mystic marriage, which is understood takes place when a man or woman becomes consciously aware of the Christ. When that experience takes place, in any individual's experience, man, woman, or child, it is called the mystical marriage, or the spiritual marriage, or the divine union. You will find it in the Song of Solomon, which so few people understand. It is really and truly the idea of the individual and Christ yielding themselves, or the individual yields themselves to God, to the Christhood, and in a moment the individual disappears and Christ becomes the head, becomes the one, the infinite one. Now, that is a relationship between man and God, union or oneness. But on the human plane, marriage is the divine union brought forth in human experience. And a marriage from that standpoint can be as joyous, as ecstatic, as good as the spiritual marriage. But it could only take place when that inner voice has spoken and said, yes, that which God has joined together, no man can put asunder. But now you can see that. But now let me lead you from there to supply and health. Because here you have the same thing. You can attain supply and you can attain health on the human plane. There's no question about that. Lots of people have done it, and many, many people are doing it every day. That can be done, just as marriage can be achieved. But just as marriage isn't always permanent, neither is the health or supply that is demonstrated humanly always permanent or abundant or joyous or satisfying. Then the answer to harmony in health and supply is the same as the answer to harmony in marriage. First, make sure that it has the divine blessing. First, make sure that the source is found within one's own being. First, be sure that whether we're thinking of health or whether we're thinking of wealth, that we go within for some measure of realization of self-completeness, of union with that infinite selfhood, the divine selfhood. If we have an undertaking, let us say we are starting out tomorrow on a new position, or search for a new continent, or writing a new book, composing a new piece of music. We all know what human footsteps we would take to achieve that end. But watch this carefully. The miracle that takes place in the experience of those who do not start on that undertaking until they've gone into communion within themselves and waited until they made the divine contact and then got the signal, go ahead, start. Then you could start out without first a script, because that presence which had announced itself would be before you every step of the way. You would soon know what Paul meant by I live, yet not I. Christ is doing all this. I can do all things through Christ. I can do all things through Christ. But to start out on any undertaking, whether it's of health, whether it's of wealth, business, politics, whatever it may be, without first receiving that signal from within, means that you're out in the world completely on your human own. And whether you succeed or fail, depends on many circumstances like accident, luck, chance, and one thing and another. But the individual who has learned to tune in on God, which automatically, you see, once you tune in on God, you don't have to tune out error. You don't have to work against error. You don't have to destroy error any more than the people in that studio last night had to tune out the noise programs. They didn't have to tune out a thing. All they had to do was tune in on that one program. And automatically the tuning in resulted in the tuning out of all the others. And so with us, we don't have to fight error. We don't have to combat error. We don't have to argue against it. We don't have to deny it or refute it. What we have to do is tune in on this inner point in consciousness, this inner selfhood of our being, this thing we call God. Now, this too is prayer. It's a higher form of prayer than petition. It's a higher form of prayer than affirmation. It's a higher form of prayer than denial. It is the prayer of acknowledgement, of recognition. It is the prayer that says, all power is in here, in the center of my being, closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and I'm going to hook in. And I'm not going to move until I feel the click, until I feel the contact, or whatever it is that makes the contact. When I feel that that has been established, then I will go forward knowing that the power is flowing. That's a prayer of communion. That is a prayer of acknowledgement, of recognition. It's also a prayer of praise and thanksgiving. Now, every time that we start our day with this type of prayer, which we also call meditation or communion, in which we sit silently and, if necessary, declare our truth or think thoughts of truth for a while until we settle down and then feel that contact made. That also is the union. That is the marriage. That is two becoming one. Whereas before there was God and this separated thing called Joel, now God and Joel are united one. Do you see what I mean? As human beings, we're just Joel or Bill or Mary out here. And God is wherever God is, actually filling all space, but of no avail to you or me. Until that moment of contact, then it takes, well, like the seed being planted in the ground. If you hold it in your hand here, nothing takes place. Planted in the ground, all of a sudden a click takes place, and then all the power of the earth rushes through that seed to work out the destiny in its own image and likeness and appear eventually as fruitage. But nothing happens until the contact. The seed has to come in contact with the life force, and it can only come into into that contact in its native element, which is buried in the ground. And so with us, we can only come into the atmosphere of God, we can only come into contact or union with God in the native atmosphere of God. And the native atmosphere of God is prayer or communion or meditation. That is the atmosphere of prayer. And it is an atmosphere of a complete realization that I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I, and I of my own self can do nothing and am nothing until the Father within me and I make contact. Then the two become one. And then Joel becomes only a mouthpiece for God, an instrument for God, an avenue through which God flows. Whether it's in this work or whether it's out selling or whether it's doing housework, makes no difference. We are then but instruments of this inner divine presence and power. Then we can understand why the heavens declare the glory of God, why the earth showeth forth his handiwork. Well, certainly, we also glorify him, not ourselves. No. We don't show forth any glory of our own. We show forth his glory, his presence, his power. We are but the instruments of his presence on earth, his power on earth. We are that through which and as which the Father works, but only as we tune in. And here is the great mystery that has not been explained to people, and so far as I know, last night was the first time that the world at large in millions was told all at one time that the secret was in attunement. It isn't because God is good that good is going to happen to you. It isn't because God is omnipresent that good is going to happen to you. It isn't because God is God that good is going to happen to you. It is because of your attunement. And to some extent, that rests with you. Not entirely. We are called by grace. You have not chosen me, I have chosen you. To some extent, it's a matter of divine grace. But to everyone who has ever been called to a metaphysical teaching, that grace has descended, and some responsibility must rest on their shoulder as to how much or how little of that attunement they are going to experience. Because at first it isn't simple, it isn't easy. It isn't easy to set aside the age-old beliefs that there isn't time enough. There's only 24 hours in the day. And that's only because we haven't taken a camera and photographed ourselves for 24 hours a day and found out that about 18 of those hours are pure waste. Thank you.